Is that what you're trying to tell me to turn this on? The little button?
No, I thought you were gonna like show me coasters again. So like your
I
coaster
can.
collection.
I can. Well, I only have one kind, these Texas A&M ones, which are made of cork.
It's part
You
of the
like it? I
swag
like
bag.
a cork.
Yeah.
Yeah, the swag
Yeah.
bag.
It's yeah,
For those that
it's
go to the
quality.
AIA conference, that's how you get one. You got to get to the A&M party. They give away swag bags. Really nice stuff. Yeah. I still have
Yeah.
I have the hand sanitizer and the breath mints and the cup. You get a cup. You get pencils. You get uh, what else? Sometimes you get something quirky, like a little
Take a little
pencil
sketch.
case,
Usually, sometimes you get a little sketchbook.
a little sketchbook,
Yeah.
post-it book. It's nice. I mean,
Yeah.
what at I
Kind of,
can't really.
it's
We're live now, so I can't really trash talk at Lawrence Tech. you know, but maybe they ought to take some notes in the A&M post-it book.
they have a nice. I mean, LTU had a nice charcuterie board, so um, but not the swag bag.
I think we're like a wine and cheese bunch, but not like a super stuffy wine and cheese bunch. But we like our charcuterie boards, connoisseurs.
Well, and as a good friend of ours, yeah, and as a good friend of ours pointed out, that for the receptions, because part of going to any conference is also sort of the gatherings and the sort of the informal conversations that happen, both kind of in between sessions and on expo floors, but also sort of in events, outside the conference center when you're out exploring. And so, the universities always have something for their alums because we have sort of state architecture organizations. They also oftentimes have gatherings and too. But as Claris pointed out, rooftops. If you get to the rooftop, like as
Priority.
part of your reception, if you've included that, it that gets you extra point. Yeah.
So speaking of which we can divulge.
There will be
Yeah.
grading. We will be giving a Yelp score.
We will. So USC has a rooftop of a brewery. So that one's see because the thing is, all the receptions are basically at the same time on the same night, which is not not uncommon. But this year it seems like extremely common. Like so, mine, yours, Claris's. I mean, I have two because I've got two different schools, and then there's AIA Michigan, and I think so that's three things, and they're I think they might be combining LTU, maybe I don't know, but uh, LTU is going to be hosted at HED office, and my friend said that their office does have a rooftop patio, and I think theirs is a much higher floor than the USC one selected. So that's
But
two now.
that one is also the furthest away from.
Oh, is it? Yeah, that's another issue too. Travel time. Oh, I don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, see,
We're
like what I liked was that I liked there was like three or four in our list of about six or seven. Um, that three or four of them are all within like a nice walking orbit. So there is potential to move between
optimistic.
events very easily.
Yeah,
Um, it's the outlier ones that architecturally, rooftop could be fun, could draw us out of the core, but yes.
it's yeah, it's I don't know. It, I if it was last year, I would have been like super optimistic to try and do it, make them all, or even 2 years ago. This year, I'm not really. I don't think I'm gonna be hustling around town. You know. So
Yeah,
sacrifices will
this
be.
is a whole new side of this is a new year and a new side of Kurt. So
It's a
we're like
slower pace.
it's a slower pace.
That's part of
Yeah.
the word of the year, right? I think it was 2 words: self care,
Oh, I thought it was slow pace.
so self preservation. So, all right. Well, I suppose we're should be sufficiently warmed up.
I think it's time.
Okay. Okay. So we turn that off. We go to that. We go to that. Hey, Jamie, cue the buttons.
Cue the buttons. So, for as fancy as Riverside may be, Riverside does not necessarily like all the fancy buttons that we try and employ on this podcast. But we're going to leave that story there and not say any more about our AI overlord podcast platform.
I think it's user error. I think it's me. I'll take the blame. Take the blame. I gotta find them. Anywho, we've got buttons. Welcome to the show. We've got the green room button. I've now figured out where the intro soundtrack button is, and all that. So welcome to the show. We have a few fun sketches to talk about, multiple sketches, and before we get to that, we have to talk a little bit about coffee. I don't know if we were going to talk a little bit about any logistics for AIA conference. Not that we have to. Logistics, whatever, we talked a little bit in the green room about.
Well, I mean, we haven't chatted in a long time. We won't. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the group text is starting to pick up pace on sort of logistics. So we are, I think that for those who are, watching, enjoying, listening to episode 199, yes, we are getting ready. This is like the home stretch. We are around the last quarter pole. Like the Kentucky Derby just happened, so everybody watched at least one horse race this year. And so we rounded that last little, and we're heading towards conference.
And so, yeah, and then for me, I just spoke at a local thing in Michigan on Tuesday, and then in 2 weeks, not even 2 weeks, I'm going out to Massachusetts to talk at another academic conference, and then I come back for a week, and then I go out to San Diego for the AI. So it's very busy this next few weeks until we get back from San Diego, which is maybe causing me a little heartburn. Is there a significant lag, or are you just pretending to be a mime now?
No. Well, I mean, there's always sort of like it was, there was a little bit of a lag, and then I decided to play into it a little bit more because, you were explaining your travel woes, and which I appreciate because I'm sort of in the same mental state, having done a few conferences, been back for a little bit, and I'm going to do back-to-back conferences again with you know our Main Street Texas brings everybody together for a whole week, and then the week following I'm going to be in San Diego. So yeah, it's I'm preparing myself and my social battery, just as you are. So
Well, thanks for playing into that long pause. So in that case,
well,
what?
you had the whole thinker kind of thing going on too. So I mean, we used to do this where we couldn't see each other, and we just had to sort of do kind of the mind meld kind of thing, um, and make assumptions about the faces the other one was making at each other while we were talking. And now there's no hiding. There's no hiding. So
I know, and it wasn't live.
shenanigans. It's
It
just all
wasn't live. It was a recorded. Sometimes the simpler things are better. I sometimes look back to that and go, "Yeah, that worked pretty good." And now with like live streaming,
oh my god,
video, and you know,
mark the tape. Like Kurt just acknowledged that maybe some tech has gone a little too far, even for Kurt. Teasing.
I know,
Just
I know,
teasing.
you catch it, trying to catch me. So, what are you in drinking in your coffee these days? Change the subject.
Well, so like I have enjoyed, and we've talked about this a little bit, but I decided to go ahead and buy myself some. Is the Starbucks 1971? Have you had this? I talked to you about their newfangled machine and the whole like the viscosity of the the brew and sort of their whole new technique and all that stuff. But they have sort of a new dark roast that's sort of like I guess it's their anniversary kind of you know from their founding. That's why 1971. But it's quite good. Like I really do it. And so I've sort of treated myself here the last couple weeks with a pretty big bag of beans.
I have not had that, so I'll have to go swing by maybe tomorrow. It sounds interesting. I definitely I don't know the last time I stepped foot in the Starbucks because I have the benefit of going to the farmers market, to the little coffee shop in there. So that's usually what I try and make a detour for, when I'm out and about downtown. Um, but for me, I am drinking. I found found up in the top shelf. I found a bag of this uh, Kalamazoo Coffee Company, and I forget the name, but it's got a fun little drawing on the bag, and so it had a neat little, you know, sketch take to it, which I don't have here to show, but it's pretty good. It's very a nice medium roast. You know, does the job. Tastes great. Fits in the
I
mug.
mean, and a city with a fun name. So what's the story? Like, do you know? Like, I know that you know a lot of like for not being a native Michigander, you do know a lot of good Michigan lore. I will give you that, like, that credit. Um, so Kalamazoo, like, what's the story? If
The
it, is there like you're in an elevator, like, and you went to Kalamazoo, and someone says what, and you say,
well, okay, so it's down on the west side, right? It's south of Grand Rapids, so it's over there on the map, on the Mitten map. I mean, just like many names in Michigan, though, Kalamazoo is a name brought from the indigenous peoples that settled, that were there before. Many of the names, Saginaw, uh, Manitowoc, or not, well, Manitowoc's in Wisconsin, but we Okay, forget all my indigenous names, but
Is it a tribe, or
uh,
is it
no,
a tribe or like a
I don't think
feature? Like sometimes
I
it's a,
wouldn't
it's a
say.
natural feature that has a name.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know a ton of fun lore of Kalamazoo, although it is a fun town. I've been there a few times, and it's they've got
Is
good
it
beer.
big?
Uh well, I don't know. Again, I don't know the population. It's not huge. It's near Grand Rapids, so Grand Rapids is the bigger west side, city adjacent. But they're both good at, there's a lot of good breweries, a lot of good because they're on the Lake Michigan, right? They're near Lake Michigan, so there's, access to the water over there. They're also Kalamazoo's even closer to the border, which then makes it a very short trip to Chicago. Right? They just got to get around the bottom of the lake. So there's that. Um, but yeah, I should. I didn't expect a history quiz, so I didn't know how to come up with a name or a story for the name.
No,
I'm sure my
it's
friends
okay.
will
You know,
remind me. But yeah, it's a fun name, I guess. Yeah, some people call it
well,
Kazoo. I think maybe that would just be me.
oh,
Some people like me.
okay. Some people like Kurt.
Yeah, Kazoo.
Yeah, well, it's just, it's funny just because like there are some, so like in Texas, we were talking about, you had somebody who had recently visited Austin for other reasons not important for this story. But in Austin there's like, it's sort of like a running joke for, well, there's two like big ones, is like, Austin's greatest like time in your mental history was when you arrived in Austin, like that year, like, and everything afterwards has been, it's just gone downhill from there. It doesn't matter like if you arrived 2 years ago or if you arrived 20 years ago, like everybody sort of adopts that persona, right, and that mantra. So there's that, and that's an interesting anecdote. But the other one though is that there's weird pronunciations of things. So like if you, and we know Jamie's, penchant for bad spelling, terrible grammar, and like odd pronunciations of things because he's a foreigner, I guess. That's what I rely on. I'm just like, it's like an, happy go lucky Canadian, can't pronounce things worth a damn. Um, but in Austin, yeah, there's a bunch of places where you look at the word and you're like, I think that says this, and then and you like your impulse is, and it's like, nope, that's not right. Right. I'm going to do that next time. I'm going to present. That's what we'll do. Like, when they flip up the thing on your phone, people used to do that, and they'd
Oh,
be like, here's your question. Like, I don't know, it's like, you know, you know, describe to me what's here, and then I have to guess.
right. Yeah.
Um, I could flip up the word and go, hey, Kurt, like, what does this say? It'd be fun. It'd be a fun game.
they, yeah.
They
Well,
are Austin lore. You can
Michigan.
you can pick a city in Michigan, and I will pick Austin. Yeah.
Michigan has a lot of, well, Michigan as a state has a lot of interesting pronunciations as well, that I had to get used to when moving here and not pronouncing. But yeah, we could do it for both sides, pronounce this word. I think there's a somebody on
Yeah. Well,
Instagram that does
this
that
is a
for
game.
Midwest terms.
This is a game that you are going to win.
I like my odds. I like winning. Oh, so since we have a good handful of sketches, you want to start sharing, and then we can kind of dig in.
Yeah, I think so. I think this is going to be an episode, folks. We did a fair amount of sort of pre-gaming curation. Um, Normally, it's just Kurt curating, but he presented some other stuff, and we had a good time kind of working through a variety of images this time. So we've got six, three from Kurt and three from myself. And I think that sort of the overarching theme, I'm just going to kind of bookend it here and maybe kind of um, say I'm viewing this conversation as about process. And we often talk about process, but I think this is going to, this is going to go in maybe a couple different ways. But um, and I think because we've got a variety of different ways the images have been rendered, probably timing wise as well, and evaluated in terms of our own work as well as each other's. But I think process, um, as a process discussion. So, welcome to the show.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Process. And so on my end, I've been continuing to sort of workshop or sort of experiment within Midjourney's ecosystem. And you asked me earlier offline about um, how the images were generated through either just text or sort of with a visual language, and so in my case they were using Midjourney's personalization. That's kind of what they call it. It's a way to sort of rate, like A/B testing, different preferences, and sort of you gain the benefit is that if you do a little bit of this, it's sort of a mutual benefit. Helps their software, but also helps you with some extra render time and so on. And I've I've I guess continually developed this particular palette, where it's although I don't know if it necessarily it's funny how it works, because I don't know exactly how it all works, but they're very sketchy, right? I wouldn't say they look like your sketches, but they look like sketches, um, with a lot of, maybe a little bit overly rendered, right? They're kind of saturated and sort of, um, there's a little oddities here and there, um, but the black and white mixed with a little bit of like sort of uh,
Well, I
watercolor.
was just going to say, yeah, I was just going to stop you there just for a second. So to just describe what I'm seeing, and I think Kurt's doing a good job of explaining the sets of drawings and the sort of style of them. I think that the challenge is, so that it does sort of have this sketch quality, but then, as he said, the watercolor, and I think the key word here is saturation. I think saturation sort of is a little bit of the give, or is the tell, I should say, that these are, have a computer assist to them, um, because I think that generally speaking, it would be hard to get, without a really, really, really high level of watercolor skill, to achieve the level of saturation and control that these images are doing. It's not to say that it couldn't be done, but I think that to me is sort of the initial tell.
Hmm.
Um, Now, I all three of them do it at sort of to varying degrees. I would argue that the one on the right really does look like a hand done, really time consuming kind of drawing, uh, where you're kind of exploring this sort of space, and it feels like it really does have a painterly quality that looks very hand done. Um, and the others have sort of like, we're trying to do that. So your third image is the one that sort of looks the most refined, where you could
Hmm.
really imagine that this is, and that it in my mind is one that probably would have taken the longest, um, if it was done in a traditional method. So I just wanted to kind of get that in there. When you said saturation, I thought that was a good way to kind of describe the three. And moving from left to right, one has a real kind of bold, um, kind of golden ochre kind of color that's been added to the image. It feels a bit arbitrary, but at the same time would be kind of hard to achieve if you didn't have a higher level of skill to kind of create that control. I think the one in the middle, has it's same that same kind of ochre color, but it's being used in a really selective kind of way, which I think does kind of give that watercolor effect where you're kind of highlighting kind of and really kind of focusing the viewer's attention down the street. But the one on the right it's super subtle, and I think that that level of control is very achievable, but also shows a real high degree of sophistication for that image.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks. And I would totally agree with 100% of what you said. The middle one is seemingly a bit the loosest of a sketch because it's a street scene. Um, and the ochre kind of plays up the storefronts. And yeah, and then on the right, yeah, it's mixing in a few other tones, and they're definitely a lot more muted. And I will divulge just for fun to get. I wanted to see what your reaction was, and so the image on the right, the third image here, is not the first iteration, but it is one in a line of say 6 or 8 different iterations of the original prompt, which is late at night. I was I basically typed into it. I added to it, which made it I think better, but the original prompt was something like the best architecture, the best design building in the world was my prompt. And then I kind of tweaked it a little bit more because it generated something that looked like I should probably show that first. I know I have it. I should show that first pass because I'm like, oh, really? Okay. And then I sort of
Yeah,
brought
see,
in,
and you said you well, you tell that story, and like I appreciate it. Like at the same time, I also have this vision of you kind of at your desk. It's sort of it's twilight, and you've got like and you're like, ah, like it's like almost like, and this is not Kurt, by the way, but just like the image in my head is like Kurt sitting at his desk. It's twilight, and he's got like a big cigar like in his mouth, and he's got the mouse in the other hand, and then he's got a whiskey, and he's like, you know, show me the best architecture in the world, and that and like he's not even using typing. He's using like voice activated, like, capture my thoughts, and he doesn't want to say too much because he wants to get that swig of whiskey. Um, and then he
yeah,
sees it and goes, "Oh, damn it.
well, yeah,
This
that's a
is going to be
great,
an iterative process."
yeah. Well, I do think what I like about this one, and I'm glad it caught your eye, is this sort of strange double arch with this um, interesting capital pediment sort of situation, um, sort of spanning between the in between the where the column is on the connecting part of the two arches. So this weird portal, it sort of has a subtle dystopian take to it, but not necessarily fully. I would say not fully dystopian, but um, just an interesting sort of mash of just a double arched uh, portal. So with a street, some
Well,
context in the back.
and I think it has sort of, there's a genre of artists and architects and architecture adjacent illustrators that you and I both follow quite heavily on Instagram. And, yes, a lot of them have sort of this dystopian sort of take on things. But I think that there's a different way to describe the same thing. And you started to do it kind of arches and sort of it's almost like this architectural remnant, right? It's almost like an archaeological site. And it has that kind of a quality to it. And it might even be a bit sort of sci-fi fantasy, but it's more about this sort of built history, right? And something has happened here, but there's sort of this architecture that's of significance, and we're seeing it present, even though there's pieces of it missing and whatnot. And I think that, ironically, is I was thinking about similar things of late, and this sort of juxtaposition. See, I use the big words sometimes, of those rendered architectural realities that we know historically, that have a long history to them, and then putting them up against something that is um, new or modern, and that there's an interplay between the two things. In my case, the sketch below it is the Tempietto with this sort of imagined installation inside that courtyard space. Um, Part of that was me reading an article about the challenges at the Biennale right now with the U.S. Pavilion, and how it's been uh, critically panned for the work that, as it's been. We spent a lot of time on a prior episode talking about the architecture version of the Biennale at the U.S. Pavilion, and now we're in the art year, and it's apparently not been well received. Same space, different installation, not well received. And it got me thinking about this sort of, how do you add to a space, and kind of work between the two things, and maybe even tell a little bit of a story. So I kind of added a figure in there because of the drama of the camera angle. But
Well, I like the it's yeah, as a sketch, it captures a really interesting narrative between historical artifact and it, installation or interpretation of space. The space is in between, or as you move through, or perspective, orientation, so on, and then utilizing the scale figure as a sort of uh, an obvious take on perspective and position, focal point, and so on. And I like the little the sort of rendered objects with these sort of basket of columns or sort of sticks. Is that the actual installation, or is that your perceived?
no, it's not. This is all out of my head. Yeah, all
Okay,
perceived.
which
Yeah.
is kind of an interesting. I was thinking about. It's kind of weird that I was kind of thinking about these sort of suspended volumes in this basket of straws. Let's call them, sticks or poles or whatever you want to call them. In my own head, it reminds me of like the that algorithmic thing I did. Remember back we were talking about NFTs so many years ago, and I did that grasshopper script that created these little baskets. Um, it kind of reminds me of that, and so the idea of that. Anyway, that's just an aspect of a reference to me, but then to the way you rendered it with this proportion, against the Tempietto, which is so. But the Tempietto is, yeah, right. That is the U.S. Pavilion, the old U.S. Pavilion, right? Or the
No,
the look of the.
no, 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 no.
Well, that's the Tempietto. This is the Tempietto.
The look of the
The
Yeah, this is just
original.
Santiago. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. The U.S. Pavilion has more of a like a Palladian kind of
Oh, right,
front to it.
right, 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 right. But interestingly, though, like the concept of the narrative that you're pulling is that as you said, the juxtaposition between old, new, and perceived uh, uh, relationship between spaces.
Well, and I've always liked the idea of, and I think it's just sort of a like a strong desire to do installation work again, but it um, I'm always fascinated with inhabiting spaces, right? And sort of the perception that you have from the outside looking in, and then from the inside looking out, or or within a space. And I think that when and the interplay between old and new, right? So if you've got sort of an existing backdrop that's old, that creates a courtyard or creates a space, so in the Tempieto's case, the Tempietto is sort of sitting at the center of this courtyard, but there's sort of space around it. So that was sort of interesting for me to try and inhabit that zone, but still allow you to kind of move into it. And so that was the exploration, and I think it's just something that I've always appreciated when I go to an art gallery and there's an installation that's trying to, um, take over a space or a volume, in a new and unique way, and against the whiteness of the box that it's in the gallery, so that it's forcing the viewer into certain locations to try and get a vantage point and try and understand it or inhabit it. Like there's a pathway through it. Um, and all of those kinds of moves, I think, are just sort of design moves. And it's as an exercise that's always sort of fascinated me and sort of captivated, items in my sketchbook. Just sometimes it's throwaway ideas, but so in this case, I just sort of fully went into it and said, okay, what would you do if you were going to, and how do you sell it? How do you sell it as sort of this dramatic, moment? So I put the figure in there, and like you said, it helps the perspective, kind of really draws you in because it's got something good in the foreground.
The and the crossover or the transition I was going to make to the other sketches that you have from your three is, again, it's relative to the sense of proportion and scale, in an interesting way that your other two sketches are kind of analytical of an actual space, right? I assume this is a a Main Street project that you're kind of currently noodling over, and so the idea of perception and perspective, and then actually sort of an interesting space adjacent to interior. So it's a courtyard adjacent to an interior, uh, an existing building that you're sort of creating a new a sort of forecourt or a volume in front that could be an outdoor space that then feeds off of and into the sort of more interior and private or other functions, programmatically you can describe. Um, which I think the back to what you were saying about Tempietto, right, is the balance of its scale to its surroundings and the relationship between indoor, outdoor, and navigating around, sort of treating it like an object, but also as an interior space. So there's some interesting, even at scale, right? Like your
Well, it's
sketches
funny you
are,
said that.
yeah.
No, it's just funny you said that because it's like it's um these are actually in a sequence as we're talking about them too. And um so this was a challenging little project where a lot of different things had happened on this site. And so there was a building in the front that had fallen in disrepair to the point of collapse. And so, but there was plenty of documentation of what that building was. And then you had this sort of opportunity, to both reconstruct as well as sort of reinvent the space in the back. And the initial impulse from the owner that we were working with was to have that forecourt, but it was just space. It wasn't sort of reestablishing the line of the street, and sort of moving past the original facade, because the original facade had to come down, even though there was there was material there, but it was just such in disrepair. So my sort of argument and sort of challenge in this particular instance was, how do you help somebody who's investing in the property to rehabilitate it, um, and wants to do a nice storefront, um, with a court in front of it, but then also reestablish the relationship with the street. And so it was sort of replicating God was, out at the street edge, but interpreting all of the openings that would have been glazing or storefront or doors as transparent elements. And so that there's this idea of, like in the Tempietto sketch, there's this idea of, we have a vantage point from the street where we're looking through an opening or through a wall or through a remnant to something that is new, and sort of that needs to be viewed, as well as the space that we may inhabit kind of in different ways. And so that was sort of the premise. And then it was, how do you not create a false sense of history by doing this? There's elements that we know are new. We have elements that we know are historic, and that we can reconstruct, in effect, reconstruct them, because we have the documentation. But then there's other parts of it that I didn't want any confusion. And so the sketch that you've zoomed up on now, which is the more refined, presentation version, sort of an ISO, kind of all these elements kind of coming together, is that the edge along the alley side, is clearly new materials. It's concrete, it's really refined steel elements, all very sort of subtly detailed, to create kind of a low enclosure where you're not necessarily creating a fence, but you're creating a sense of space, and you're not confusing anybody about what was there before, and what is in fact new. And so that was, but all of that got, through the evolution of the work in the sketchbook, of, how do I start to create these portions? How tall do things need to be? What could also be in this space? How do you give it the flexibility that it needs? How do you create the perspective towards the new facade? All of those things all at once.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool approach. It creates this sort of, I don't want to necessarily say shadow, but the remnant, or the representation of remnant, reflection, um, this sort of translation of, from one facade to, another at the border, creating a boundary. So it's really nice, conceptual approach, and it's interesting. I appreciate. I know you. Oh, I mean, you're deep into the Secretary of Standards, but the aspect of finding creative ways to utilize, or the standards, to not replicate history, but represent, or reflect what elements you can, in a new manner, that doesn't take away by adding too much. It's kind of, that might sound a little weird, but I think it kind of makes sense, right?
No, I think it's a good way to describe it. And what was nice was, you know, um, it was a really great dialogue, with myself, with the owner, as well as the city itself. Because the city, wants to have a seat at this table, with their sort of district guidelines, um, but they're not in a position to design something, and they shouldn't be, right? They shouldn't really be,
Right.
designing from a city staff point of view, or from the dais, if they're if they're, servant, leaders on a commission or something like that, they shouldn't be designing from the dais. They should have a framework that they're reviewing materials, guidance. And so kind of in that, you know, in that narrative, you know, you have a bunch of different parties who all want the best for this site and for the city that they're in, but they're not necessarily sure how to get there from here. You know, and somebody's put something forward as sort of their concept. And then in my case, I had the luxury, you know, and it is a luxury of being able to say, yeah, but what if? Like, can we take a look at it just one more time? You know, can I show you just one other way to look at this same site, give you the things that you're really excited about, but then also give you kind of a backing that relates, like, as you said, to the secretary's standards, you know, that are kind of, you know, overriding guidance in a playbook, you know, for these kinds of things, but trying to do it in a fresh way. And not to say that this is the only way that this site could have been handled, certainly, but it was, you know, fortunately, it was very well received. You know, the owner was very, very excited, and was and remarked even to the point of saying something to the effect of, you know, like, I hadn't thought of that. You know, this is even maybe better than what we originally had. You know, and which is a high compliment. You know, probably the highest compliment you could receive as a designer. You know, is where you're bringing your talents to bear and sharing that. And you know, and I try and explain kind of process. So it's like, how did I leap to this point? And not all folks do that, and or they do it in different ways. I try and do it in a way which is, as best as I can manage, accessible for folks, because you could provide this kind of level of guidance sometimes and do it in such a jargony kind of way, that someone might perceive it as it's the only option. And I don't want anybody to kind of think that either. It's just that I've interpreted it a certain way, and it struck me as a designer in this framework, you know, given all the players and all the pieces that I know, that, you know, let's talk about this, you know, and that's kind of where it went.
Well, I think to go back to your point on process, to where we started with the sketches, and kind of circle it back around, and now I'm in post semester mode, right? We finished the semester, and at every final presentation for an architecture student, right, is pinning up their work, and the encouragement is always, you know, bring parts of the process to the presentation. You know, don't just bring the final product. And you know, your sketches, without those sketches, the little thumbnails, it would be harder, I think, to present, not necessarily convince, but provide enough evidence of why, you know, that, you know, it could be perceived as like, you're going to build a wall for just a wall, and no, you know, no building, just the wall.
Right,
So
right.
the process walks them through that. And so this, I hope, if my students are listening, or any students out there, um, you know, this is why we ask for the process, not the finished product, is so that you don't just talk about how you got there, but you can show how your brain is arriving at these final, you know, design conclusion or assumption or presentation, you know.
Well, and I'm glad that you brought up your students in sort of this semester. I had an opportunity to sit in on some final reviews, at A&M, and um, one of them that sort of struck me, you know, relates exactly to this topic, and it's something maybe for you to. I know you're always sort of looking for a new wrinkle of sort of how to include like a different drawing technique or something like that into the studio. And I've not seen this done in a long time, and I thought it was super successful. I'm going to send you some photos, from that course, but it was a junior level review, and the students were sort of, you know, challenged with a site, an urban site. Actually happened to be in Austin, so I was very familiar with it, which was great. But the instructor really wanted him to be thinking in plan and section. So, a man after both of our hearts, right? So, thinking in plan and section, designing in plan and section, really kind of trying to create some spaces, that were related to the program. And so the first drawing that he encouraged them to do as an exercise was a charcoal drawing of the building in section, sort of as a process sketch. And so it was and a large format. So it was like get your whole arm out, that whole technique that we've talked about where you're kind of moving from the shoulder and the elbow and the whole thing. And these drawings class wide were fantastic. Um, and the impulse that was in that exercise, even though the evolved from that, with much more refined drawings and Revit models and renderings and physical models and mock-ups and all those types of things, the DNA of the idea was still present in that charcoal sketch. And so he had them, up on the wall in the studio, and some of the students, not all of them, but the ones who did, included it in their slide deck. It's fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I actually was just sitting down on Tuesday, that presentation I gave at Michigan Housing Conference was alongside the faculty. We were both merged into one presentation. So the person I taught with this past semester, Scott, we had this conversation at lunch at the conference about doing almost, maybe not quite that scale, but basically talking about like do the drawing in charcoal, right? How we, not that, oh, that's how we used to do it, but in a media that you don't get the fine line of Revit or Rhino or whatever, you have to, block out the components that are the value. So yeah, that's cool. I'm glad you brought that up, and I will. It'll probably sort of reseed itself into a conversation for next year, in ways to try and attempt to maintain some of these tools and techniques in a way that provides the benefit of why that kind of a sketch matters, not because we're trying to teach you an old technique, but how to use your brain and hand-eye coordination in a way that you can't quite always get from a computer. So that's the second time Kurt says something of going back to some older. If we keep talking, Jamie, it'll be we will change change my whole career trajectory.
I've been working on you for this is 7 years now. So, whatever. All good.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's call that a wrap. And it'll be fun. We're right on the heels of 200. So we have some fun plans for number 200. So, all right. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks.